Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Hello, everybody, friends and neighbors and new people and all those who have an interest in learning more about the 1950s, because that's pretty much what we focus on and who we are, right, Jackie?
Exactly.
Okay.
So, everyone, do take a look at the upper right-hand corner, at least it's right in mine. You'll see www.whilethewindmillwatched.com. That is the book that kicked off the 1950s Fun Chat, and we do encourage you to go to the bottom where you see www.whilethewindmillwatched.com for all information about the book and about the Fun Chats. So we'll get going. So we begin from Missouri to Uganda, to the return to the States. Our guest has experienced and continues to experience a very full life. Myrna Whigham entered this world on December 6th in 1943 during two raging storms, World War II and a northwestern Missouri snowstorm. She was born in her family's farmhouse and raised on that farm, which was located 2 miles west of the now extinct settlement of Nishnabotna, northwest Missouri. The farm raised corn and wheat as primary crops and hogs and cattle for livestock. Now, Myrna received her BS degree from Northwest Missouri State University in 1965, majoring in biology and chemistry. She earned her MS in plant physiology and her PhD in higher education with an emphasis in math and science from Iowa State University. In 1964, Myrna married Keith Whigham. The marriage resulted in 3 children, 6 grandchildren, and 1 great-granddaughter. Myrna's career resume includes teaching high school sciences and teaching and advising students at the University of Illinois and Iowa State University. She currently lives in Green Hills Retirement Community in Ames, Iowa. Myrna, welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat.
Thank you.
So we are going to ask you to, first of all, please touch briefly on how World War II affected your family.
Well, I had an Uncle Leonard who served in World War II, and prior to his going to the war, they farmed together. So he was gone from approximately 43, the year I was born, to 1945. So my father had to handle all of the farming by himself during that time then. And he lived with us, and I have such good memories of him telling me that he so missed getting to see and be with me as a baby that he always carried my picture in his wallet all during the war. And then telling me about as he came home, getting out of the depot in Corning, Missouri, and looking, and there I stood in my mother's arms, and the first thing he did was come over, take me, and give me a big hug. So that's kind of, and then of course over the years I heard a lot of his war stories, and after they'd been back from the war for a number of years, his field artillery group used to get together annually, fly in from everywhere, and enjoy being together again. And he often helped, my sisters and I helped with those reunions when he might be hosting them. So that's kind of my connection to the war.
Okay, so let's move on to your life on the farm then, and its influences before and during after that very influential flood of 1952. Our memories are alike in that, even though our flood was in North Dakota, it went all the way down.
Yes, I was raised on a farm. There was, I had 3 sisters, so there were 4 of us. And kind of the division of labor on our farm was the oldest and youngest stayed in the house, learned those domestic skills, and helped my mother, and the two middle sisters, we were the farm hands and helped Dad and Uncle Leonard with the farming. And basically, corn and wheat, cattle and hog farm. And so I have such fond memories of learning to drive and helping put up hay. They had those old hay balers where one person sat on one side and poked a wire through, and another person sat on the other side and twisted that wire. And of course, that was my sister Janice and I, the two middle sisters, that got to do those chores. But we weren't able to handle lifting the bales. And so Dad had built a hay sled, and we would roll the bales over there, and he'd slowly drive that John Deere tractor. And we were able to manage then helping by rolling the bales on that low level sled rather than have to lift them. So he kind of adapted the farm labor jobs to be so we could handle them. And of course, we always milked 6 cows. And so I milked cows morning and evening. And then the men would go on and do other things. And I'd take it to the house and run it through a separator. And we sold the cream then by taking it to the local depot and putting it on the train. And I'd carry the skim milk back down to the barn and feed the hogs and do things like that. So I just grew up a young woman with very few domestic skills, but a lot of good farm skills, I think. And I love driving that B John Deere.
What was fun about that?
Oh, just being outside and feeling like you were really doing something important when you got to drive a tractor. And of course, that wasn't until I was a little bit older. But to this day, I just love going to a tractor show and sitting on a B John Deere for just a little bit.
Sure. Oh, yes. I've got a lot of memories come flooding back.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Take us up to the flood then, please.
Yes. I remember waking up one morning and all the furniture and everything was crammed around my bed because during the night we'd gotten word that the house and our whole area was going to flood. We lived on bottom ground, our farm, the Missouri River, right along that. And so during the night, the warning had come from the Corps of Engineers, and the men had all driven the cattle and hogs and things to the hills and put them in the barns, and lots of the people that farm just out of the flood range. And so such a change to just realize that you had to get out of there. We were out of our home for 3 months and lived with my grandmother, and she was out of her home also. And so 3 families, my grandmother and my aunt, mom's sister, and our family lived in that little small house for 3 months before we were able to get back in. And then during that time, Dad and Uncle Leonard had the hay mound of the barn filled with the chickens. So they would go in every day with a rowboat and do what needed to be done around the farmstead, primarily feeding the animals that they had in the hay mound of the barn. So that was an interesting time for us, and certainly one we will never forget.
yes.
And living in that farm community was just great. The neighbors all helped each other. And I was just telling Janine a few minutes ago, for example, our mother would never let us accept money for babysitting. That was something you did. If your neighbors needed help, then you helped them. And when my mother died when I was 13, I really saw how they would all rally around and help me also. I had no domestic skills, but the neighbor that lived up on the corner, I could, of course, always stop by because she fried chickens every morning, and I knew I could pick up chickens and that kind of thing. And mother was still alive, the whole neighborhood lived around a section of land. And since there was always fish coming out of the Missouri River, we just got together a lot. And it was always at our house. And the men would fry fish, and the women would always fix the same thing, coleslaw and desserts. Just had a wonderful social life. And so once my mother was no longer part of that, it's like all the neighbors just pitched in, and as a teenager told me what to do and things I needed to do, if I was dressed appropriately or not. And of course, they still needed helping babysitting once in a while. And so I always said I was raised by two dads, my dad and Uncle Leonard, but those neighbors sure filled in a lot. And I still communicate with some of them to this day. So,
Myrna, did your dad take over the domestic skills when your mom was no longer there?
well, a little bit. He did a little bit of cooking, but it was always approximately the same meal. Fry a couple slices of bacon and cut a potato into the skillet, break a couple eggs over it, and had that can of beans setting over on the wood stove. And so it was kind of like we basically ate the same thing every day if and when we ate at home, or just finished eating all the things Mom already had canned and in the freezer and so forth. Yeah.
So you evidently had electricity because you just mentioned a freezer.
Yes.
But you also had a wood stove?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And
Yes.
that was, did you have an electric or a gas range as well?
No, not, I don't believe while I was, well, maybe at the end when I was living at home.
Mm-hmm.
But
Myrna, were those roads all paved in that surrounding farmland?
actually, there was a neighbor that lived, the last neighbor on, and then it was the whole big section, and they were all mud roads. And so it was really kind of interesting. As I was telling Janine earlier, if you knew you had a date at 6 o'clock that night and it started raining at 4 or 5 o'clock, well, you'd go up to Donald and Marilyn's house on the corner, because if you got stuck in the mud, or a friend got stuck in the mud coming to see you, why, he'd be the one with the tractor that had to come pull you out, and that type of thing. So it was just such a wonderful neighborhood to grow up in. And to this day, I talk to, like in my confirmation class, 2 of the 8 of us that are, 3 then that are still alive. We still communicate probably once a month, just having a nice chat and seeing how the others are doing. So really lifetime friends from that neighborhood.
What inspired you to go on to college?
Well,
can we back up? That's a good, my next question leads into that. And that is, please tell us about that first job you had when you were 14 years old, and then how that shaped your education.
Yes. First of all, I went to many different schools. In first grade, I was at Nishnabotna. And when my mother took me there to enroll, we found out that there was only going to be one person in my grade. I can't see the picture on the screen now.
Oh, okay. You're still coming through okay on our end.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Let's see.
And they told me that there was only one person in my grade, which should be me. So then they started me in first grade. And I went there a year, and then Corning, Missouri School from 2 through 6th grade, and Craig, Missouri School for 7th grade. And then at 8th grade, they decided that everyone had to go to the high school that was in their home county rather than with all their friends that they had grown up with.
Oh, yes.
So
yes.
I started 8th grade in Rockport, Missouri, and I was in a typing class. And one day my typing teacher got a phone call wanting to know who was a good typist and could really pound the keyboard. Well, that happened to be me. And so the county collector hired me. And what I did was type tax receipts that were 3 carbon copies. And so you did have to really pound, and
Yes.
it's all just legal descriptions and that sort of thing. And so I did that Saturdays, sometimes Sunday afternoons or whatever, but I worked quite a bit. And so that helped give me some spending money when I was starting in 8th grade on. No, I guess starting my freshman year on. And then I started school in Rockport in the 8th grade. So that was September. And my mother died the middle of September. So it was really a time of transition for me. New school, all new friends, new job, and of course, not having a mother at home anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So then this man was really good to me, and he gave me lots of compliments. And once I'd get all those tax receipts typed, then it was time to calculate the taxes for the coming year. So he got started letting me do a lot of the math. And big old Olivetti calculator there. And I would just sit all day and calculate percentages. So the appraised value was this, and take it times the school tax, which was 0.01, and fill in the amount by hand and so forth and so on. So really my career during high school, and I know a lot of my friends were, working the pool or working as in restaurants or whatever. Mine was sitting at that big round table up at the courthouse doing all those calculations for taxes. And then I still remember, you asked about that leading into my career, he was most influential because he would always compliment me on my math skills and tell me that, I needed to think about going to college and that. And then the summer after my junior year, he came in and he said, the first day of work, he said, I'm not going to pay you this summer until the last day of August. And then I will sign over the money the day your tuition is due at Northwest Missouri State. And tuition, room and board was $600. And he paid me $200 a month. And this kind of took me back that 3 months I wasn't going to have any salary. And so I said, but what am I going to do for spending money this summer and so forth? He says, the day tuition is due, I'll pay the tuition. And for spending money, he indicated that I guess you're going to have to work overtime. So then the end of each week, what I'd worked overtime, why he'd give me the money and so forth and so on. And
Smart.
so that's how all that worked. And none of my other family or sisters had gone or been to college. And that's why I ended up going, because I still had a good job. And anytime I was home for a weekend or the 2 or 3 weeks over Christmas break and that, I'd be up at the courthouse working full time.
Sure. Well, he certainly helped establish a very excellent work ethic in you.
Yes, he certainly did. And it was fun work. I enjoyed it. I was working with all professionals and they treated me all right. So it really was fun work.
Huh. So, Myrna, let's move across the pond to your family's living in Uganda, East Africa. Why did this move occur, and what are some of the highlights of your short time in Uganda?
Well, my husband took a job there with USDA, and he decided it was really what he wanted to do. And I was pregnant, and we were a little hesitant. But we decided we'd just go ahead and go. And if it didn't work out my having the baby in Uganda, then I'd fly back home to have the baby. And so every time I would see a British woman, in other words, a white woman with a baby, I would ask her where she had the child, and it kept coming up a Catholic mission hospital. And previously to that, I had visited the big state hospital in the area, and they had a good professional staff, but no support staff whatsoever. So I was pretty leery of having a child in one of those wards and so forth. But at this particular location, a Franciscan order of nuns was running the hospital, and the OBGYN there was trained in the UK. So the day Leah was going to be born, she literally sat by my bedside all day and held my hand, and we visited and talked. And Keith was in the room with us. And then when the baby was about ready to be born, he said, well, where should I go to wait? And she says, what do you mean? Get over here and help me.
Yes. And so he did?
He couldn't believe it, but he did. And it was still, he will talk about it, because back then fathers were never even permitted in the area. And he got to help with the birth of that child, watch it be born and everything. And he just thought that was really special.
You bet.
And then Leah was kind of just a tourist attraction because she had white blonde hair. And of course, I did not breastfeed, so I was feeding her out of bottle. And occasionally I was even lucky enough to buy a few disposable diapers. And if I'd be changing her or feeding her or whatever, I would draw a crowd, because those local people had never seen anything like that.
Sure.
And then with that, she was a bald-headed baby, and when the blonde hair started coming out, it just kind of shimmer in the wind, and that really caught their attention also.
Uh-huh.
And then in addition, it truly was a wonderful time in our life. We just loved. It was very tropical. It was on the equator, 65, 85 every day. And just driving into the local village, we would see giraffe and elephant and antelope. Keith fished on the Nile River, and that provided quite a bit of our meat. I had a houseboy that did his primary work was cooking, and a nurse, and she helped me a lot with Leah. Launder of diapers, and they all had to be ironed. Everything had to be ironed that was hung outside to dry, because there was a type of fly that laid eggs on the clothing, and if you didn't kill those eggs, so literally you were ironing underwear and diapers and all that sort of thing. And Charles helped me a lot with just the housework, because there was no going to a grocery store. We'd go out, the nearest grocery store was 2 or 3 hours away. We'd go out in the mornings and see what the vervet monkeys had not eaten over the evening, so that we could fix it for lunch that day. Or someone would come by with a huge stalk of bananas. And then when all those bananas would ripen at the same time, he would spend the whole day making banana bread. And that was always our primary breakfast, was toasted banana bread.
Was that a recipe that from your family?
No, just, the Better Homes and Garden cookbook or whatever. I only had one cookbook there, but It wasn't much good, because a lot of the things would start with something that I wouldn't have access with, a box of this or a can of that type of thing. And so it was an interesting time. We ate meat from the research station where we were. It was up country, and they had research animals there also. So every once in a while they'd butcher an old cow and come by and ask me how many kilo of meat I wanted, and chop off 3 or 4 kilo. And I'd stand there and thinking, what am I going to do with this? Because it definitely wasn't good quality. So it usually meant having Charles grind it all and make it into patties or something like that, or we would make some type of a sauce to put the meat in. And the chickens were not any younger when they were butchered either. So they fished for a lot of tilapia out of the Nile River, and we ate a lot of fish when we were there also. So I really have fond memories from my time of those two people that worked for me, and also that nun that was in the capital city that helped with the delivery of our child. And on Leah's 50th birthday, I wonder if I can find her. So I just Googled Nsambi Hospital in Kampala, Uganda, and I had an email back within 5-10 minutes. She says, I'm retired, but I still do quite a bit of volunteer work here. And she said, I'm just so pleased to find out what happened in the career of that young baby I delivered 50 years ago, she said.
Yes.
Good for you for reaching out.
Really good memories of Uganda.
Myrna, when I know you as someone who developed some STEM programs in Iowa.
What kind of programs?
STEM.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Can you tell us how that all occurred?
Well, when we came back, we were at the University of Illinois for 4 years. And I'll tell you a little bit about my first job interview. I decided, well, with a 2-month-old and a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old, I'm going to just try to teach at the community college here. So I had an interview. It went very well, I thought. And so there was 5 on the committee, 4 women and 1 man, the other way around, 1 woman and 4 men. And that woman called me almost immediately after the interview, and she said, I so wanted you to go to work for us, thought you were so well qualified, but she said, I was the only yes vote. The men immediately all voted no, and they said they didn't want to mess with a young mother who'd be calling in sick or having to do something for the kids every morning or whatever. And so, of course, that upset me, but there was nothing I could do about it. And then where Keith was with the INSOI project at the University of Illinois was where he'd been hired, and he mentioned it at work. And someone knew a professor over in botany and lined me up with an interview there. And he liked the looks of my resume and so forth. But then he also said, well, I understand you have young children. What are you planning to do for childcare? And I said, I already have them enrolled at the university childcare on campus. And he said, and when can you drop them off? And I said, 7:30 a.m. He almost smiled and dropped his jaw because all of a sudden he was thinking that I could teach the 8 o'clock classes. And he was so excited. And he said, would you teach all 8 o'clock classes 5 days a week? And I said, yes, I'd be happy to. And he looked at me and he said, you're hired. And he was such a good mentor for me. And it was unheard of in that day. And he just said to me, he said, well, if you'll teach your turn at doing the plant physiology lectures in this beginning botany course, and that'll take 2 or 3 weeks, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8. And then if you'll teach labs, the 8 to 10 labs on Tuesday and Thursday morning, that'll be your full-time load. And you might as well go home at noon and you can grade papers or take care of your children, prepare for your lectures the next day, and so forth. So I couldn't believe that he let me work from home afternoons, and that's the first I'd ever even heard of being able to work from home.
Myrna, what year was that? Do you recall?
What year was that? It would have been I was trying to think, early 60s, late 50s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that would have been unusual then.
Yeah. And then we were there 4 years, and I came back to the University of Illinois. And I was hired by freshman engineering because I was certified to teach in all the sciences. And that program, the kids took general sciences and math their first year, and then based on their grade point, were admitted into their department. And so, like the first day of work, though, someone walked in my office, one of the professors, and said, "Oh, I have to have this test typed right now, and all the secretaries are busy. I know you're new, but would you mind typing it for me?" And I looked at him and I said, "I'd love to type your test, but I don't know how to type."
Was that the truth?
He just assumed I was a secretary because I was a female. And the department was basically made up of all men and only one other female professional. And it ended up being a wonderful job for me because I hadn't completed a PhD yet. And they also told me that I could work on, if I didn't take a noon hour for lunch, I could take one class per semester and work on my PhD. And they had all kinds of data they had been collecting about the women who came to engineering and left and why they left and so forth and so on. So that became basically what I did and wrote up, was analyze all that data for my PhD dissertation. And then, George Burnett, you probably remember him. He was associate dean, and he was so concerned about our findings, and some of the departments only had 2% women in them. But he wanted me to come, for example, every committee, he wanted to have at least one woman on it. So that became my job to be on all these committees and everything, and I just couldn't get everything done. So he finally said, "I'm going to give you half time to work on women in science and engineering concerns here at Iowa State." And so I credit George Burnett as start, and he was recently a Green Hills resident. I credit him a lot with having the foresight to give me time to work on that program. And to this day, the Women in Science and Engineering program exists at Iowa State, is very successful, provides a lot of scholarships for women. And that's how it all kind of got started. And I was the first director of that particular program.
Myrna, how did you recruit these young ladies to be in that program at Iowa State?
Well, I got excellent grant money, and where it started was working with teachers. So I spent my summers going around the state of Iowa doing workshops for math and science teachers. And I became known for doing activity-based learning so that math and science became fun.
Mm-hmm.
And before we started doing these things, it wasn't unusual when a student enrolled in the College of Education at Iowa State to ask them why they picked wanting to be an elementary teacher or whatever, for them to say, "Oh, because I'm terrible in math and science." And I said, look them right back in the eye and say, "Well, you'll be teaching math and science half of the time." And they were flabbergasted at that. So we really saw a need, and we did, 3 months in the summer, myself and what I called a group of master teachers simply went out and did 1 week workshops for math and science teachers and taught them how to teach so the students would enjoy it and they would enjoy it. And the message was always just sent everywhere, including myself when I was in high school, that young women do not do math and science. So I was well aware, because those were my favorite subjects, how people were treated. Mm-hmm. And I still remember when I went in to and filled out the forms to attend Northwest Missouri State, and I was asked what I wanted to major in, and I said, well, math or sciences. And they looked at me and said, well, do you want to be a nurse or do you want to teach So those were my two options provided, not the science careers or engineering or that sort of thing. So a lot of it was just presenting what the options were to these young women. And then compliments. As I said earlier, my boss couldn't compliment me enough on my math skills or science skills. So naturally, that's what I wanted to do. And we would sit back and watch classrooms, and women would be complimented for the beauty of their science folder they had, notebook or whatever they created, the folder it was in, rather than the content. And so just how you would compliment women and encourage them and let them know all these wonderful careers were possible. And we started doing career conferences on campus that would attract as many as 1,000 women and invite the astronaut woman in to be a keynote speaker, or provide women in other fields into the high schools and that to give talks and encourage them to pick any field they wanted in the sciences. It didn't have to be teaching. It could certainly be teaching, but we really encourage those types of activities. So I'm proud to say that that still exists, that program. And I know one of the people who came back and worked in freshman engineering about the time I did. She had received a mechanical engineering degree and wanted to something in Ames rather than working for John Deere and Ankeny. And she came back and got a master's, a PhD, and was the first department chair for the mechanical engineering program at Iowa State.
Yes.
And probably nationwide mechanical engineering programs. So it just warmed our hearts to see so many women start to go into some of those programs. And of course, we covered all the sciences. And now I also, it took a very high grade point to get into vet med. And so a lot of these women that were in undergrad sciences and stuff, we would work and help them get into vet med. And now there seems to be almost a concern that because there's so many more women in the vet college here than there are men. But then someone will say to me, well, you know, women will work for less. So that's why people hire women vets so readily. And that there are so many of them now. But it's almost like we flipped in some of the STEM subjects of having more women now.
Well, you certainly have made your mark in the area of science and engineering, and it's wonderful the love that you have for inspiring young women to become involved in those types of careers. Thank you so much for doing that, Myrna.
We're certainly turned the corner in a lot of fields. So
yes, we are at the end of our chat, Myrna. This has gone quickly.
It sure has.
Yes.
And so, I enjoyed so much. Thank you for doing it.
You are very, very welcome.
We're certainly glad to have you.
Jackie, how can you close our program, please?
Well, just remind viewers to look at the belt below that's going across www.wildwomenwatch.com and take a look at many of the former fun chats that we have. They talk about so many areas of the 1950s history. So until next time, tell your friends, even your relatives, about the 1950s fun chat. Until next time, toodaloo.
Bye-bye.